In the dazzling heart of Londinium, a city where opulence met relentless ambition, Alexander Sterling, a man celebrated for both his vast fortune and his imperious demeanor, found himself unexpectedly drawn into a wager that would irrevocably alter the course of his meticulously controlled life. Known throughout high society for his shrewd business acumen and his habit of winning at every challenge, Alexander had grown accustomed to orchestrating success on his own terms. Yet, during one glittering evening at an extravagant gala held in one of Londinium's most sumptuous ballrooms, a challenge was flung into the mix that promised to test every facet of his persona. It was at this glittering soiree, amid cascades of laughter and clinking champagne glasses, that Tristan Cole, an old friend as notorious for his mischievous wit as for his influential presence, declared with a sly, knowing smirk, "Alexander, let us see if you have the mettle to step outside the confines of your familiar taste. I challenge you to wed a woman who defies the archetype you so proudly parade." His words, teasing yet potent, reverberated through the murmuring crowd and set the stage for an encounter that none could have predicted. For Alexander, whose romantic escapades until then had always involved ethereal, delicate women, figures of conventional beauty who seemed to exist only to accentuate his own grandeur, the proposition was as baffling as it was provocative. His eyes narrowed in intrigue as he inquired coolly, "And what prize is there to be claimed, Tristan?" With a dramatic flourish, Tristan raised his crystal champagne flute and announced, $1 million to the victor, but only if you commit to a marriage lasting no less than 6 months. The allure of a lucrative reward, combined with the thrill of a high-stakes gamble, was irresistible. Without a second thought, Alexander accepted, convinced that his dominance would soon extend even to the realm of unconventional romance. In the days that followed, Alexander received further details about the woman chosen for this audacious bet, a woman who would come to be known as Seraphina Blake. Unlike the usual paramour in his life, Seraphina was renowned not for her delicate features or typical allure, but for her unyielding confidence, independence, and a spirit that could rival the strongest of storms. With a boldness that both fascinated and disturbed him, Alexander recognized immediately that this challenge was far more intricate than a mere dalliance. It was a contest of wills, an arena where control and defiance would wage an unspoken battle. Their first encounter was arranged at a prestigious restaurant that prided itself on its luxurious ambiance and impeccable service. When Seraphina arrived, Alexander's eyes were immediately drawn to her striking difference. There was an air of self-assurance about her, a calm yet unyielding presence that rendered the grandeur of the establishment almost superfluous. Unperturbed by the glittering surroundings or by Alexander's own imposing aura, she fixed him with a look that was both direct and unwavering. "You must be Alexander Sterling," she stated firmly as she took her seat, her tone leaving little room for pretense. Alexander returned the introduction with a measured smile, extending his hand in a gesture of formal courtesy. After a brief pause, she clasped his hand with a grip that betrayed her inner strength and determination. Without any small talk, Seraphina broke the customary niceties. "Let us dispense with pleasantries," she began, her voice both calm and resolute. "I am fully aware of the terms under which we have agreed to this union." Alexander, though taken aback by her forthright manner, maintained his composed exterior. "Yet you have consented to meet me," he queried, his tone laced with a mixture of curiosity and challenge. Seraphina allowed a moment of thoughtful silence before replying, "I have my reasons, Alexander. Understand this. Though 6 months may seem brief, it is ample time for much to be altered." Her words resonated with a quiet but potent defiance. As the evening drew to a close, Alexander found himself both perturbed and deeply intrigued. Here was a woman who did not conform to his expectations, who neither trembled at his presence nor sought to be swayed by his wealth. Instead, Seraphina's unyielding independence and resolute character promised a challenge unlike any he had previously encountered. The seeds of both rivalry and a peculiar sort of respect were sown that night, as Alexander began to realize that the stakes extended far beyond a simple wager. In the days that followed, the two arranged a second meeting, a decision that would further complicate the intricate dance of power and resistance between them. Eschewing the glamorous backdrop of upscale restaurants, Seraphina suggested a quaint, unpretentious cafe as the setting for their next encounter. Though unaccustomed to such simplicity, Alexander acquiesced, driven by a desire to understand the enigmatic woman who had so effortlessly disrupted his established order. Upon his arrival, he found Seraphina seated at a modest table, her demeanor relaxed, yet imbued with the same steadfast resolve that had marked their previous meeting. Greeting him with a warm, if understated smile, she remarked teasingly, "I assumed you preferred the grandeur of five-star dining." Alexander, momentarily disarmed by the simplicity of the setting, replied with an attempt at levity. "Sometimes it is refreshing to break from routine." Yet beneath his casual tone lay the undeniable undercurrent of curiosity and a subtle acknowledgement of the challenge before him. Over steaming cups of tea and light conversation, the air between them grew charged with unspoken agreements and quiet defiance. Seraphina soon steered the discussion towards the core of their arrangement. "If we are to proceed with this union, let there be no illusions," she stated plainly, setting her cup down with deliberate care. "I harbor no interest in your wealth or the lavish lifestyle that it affords." Her declaration left Alexander momentarily silent, for it was a sentiment that clashed directly with his ingrained expectations of marital conquest. "Then what is it that you seek?" he inquired, genuine curiosity coloring his tone. "I seek autonomy," she replied without hesitation. "My life and my dignity shall remain unblemished by this temporary contract." Although the answer was not what Alexander had anticipated, he found himself reluctantly admiring her candor. To him, the marriage was nothing more than a formal exercise, a means to secure a win in a bet. If her independence was to be preserved, so be it. 6 months, he conceded, and then we return to our separate lives. For a fleeting moment, Seraphina scrutinized him, as though ensuring that he truly grasped the implications of her words, before nodding in silent agreement. Yet, as the days turned inexorably toward the day of their wedding, an unsettling tension began to seep into Alexander's carefully constructed reality. The ceremony itself was conducted with the cold precision of a business transaction, a union executed not in celebration, but as the final stipulation of a challenge. Immediately following the stark proceedings, Alexander escorted Seraphina to his expansive penthouse, perched atop one of Londinium's most iconic skyscrapers, a monument to his success and the very embodiment of his wealth. The panoramic view, framed by enormous glass windows that captured the twinkling city lights, was a testament to the luxurious world Alexander inhabited. Every detail of the interior, from the rare artworks adorning the walls to the exquisite furnishings, was a calculated display of affluence, a battleground where he believed his material might could ultimately sway Seraphina's heart. However, the moment she crossed the threshold of his domain, Seraphina's demeanor shifted to one of unyielding detachment. Rather than displaying awe or submission in the face of such extravagance, she regarded it all with a cool indifference, her eyes reflecting nothing but resolute defiance. 6 months, Alexander? Not a day more, she pronounced firmly, moving towards one of the expansive windows and gazing out at the glittering metropolis as if it were a mere backdrop to her steadfast spirit. Though Alexander offered a confident smile, a flicker of uncertainty stirred within him. In his previous experiences, every woman who had crossed his path had eventually succumbed to the allure of his wealth and charm. Yet Seraphina, with her unwavering poise and disinterest in material excess, presented a challenge he had never before encountered. In the ensuing days, Alexander threw himself into his efforts to win her over, employing every tactic in his arsenal. Lavish gifts, priceless jewelry, couture garments, and extravagant vacations were bestowed upon her in the expectation that she would, if only gradually, yield to the opulence he so fervently believed in. Yet with each offer, Seraphina's response remained a steadfast refusal. "I do not require these trappings," she would calmly remark, her tone imbued with a quiet strength that only deepened Alexander's frustration. For the first time in his life, the man who had always claimed victory in every contest began to feel the sting of defeat. A wound inflicted not upon his pride alone, but upon the very core of his identity as a conqueror of hearts and ambitions. This internal struggle only fanned the flames of Alexander's determination. What had once been a simple bet now evolved into a deeply personal contest of wills. Unable to tolerate any semblance of being controlled or defied, Alexander began to resort to increasingly aggressive tactics. He imposed restrictions on Seraphina's daily routines, arguing that her need for independence was incompatible with the lifestyle that his wealth could afford her. "You no longer require a salary," he insisted, attempting to justify his interference by rebranding it as an extension of his care. When Seraphina insisted on attending work or engaging in activities vital to her personal growth, Alexander would orchestrate delays, manipulate schedules, and subtly undermine her professional connections. Every maneuver was designed to tighten his grip and force her into a position of dependency. Despite his relentless efforts, Seraphina remained resolute, a veritable fortress impervious to Alexander's advances. Even as small provocations sparked tense exchanges, she wielded her sharp wit and unwavering composure as armor against his attempts to belittle her independence. One particularly charged evening, as the tension in their shared space reached a fever pitch, Alexander's frustration gave way to an outburst of raw emotion. "I fail to comprehend you, Seraphina," he declared, his voice a mix of exasperation and a desperate need for understanding. "Other women would embrace the luxury that surrounds us, but you seem to regard it with disdain. What is it that you truly desire?" At that moment, Seraphina's eyes, which had remained impassive until then, flashed with an intensity that left Alexander momentarily speechless. "I desire respect," she answered, her voice both firm and impassioned. "I am not a pawn to be maneuvered at your whim. You may surround me with riches, but money cannot purchase the dignity and self-worth that I hold dear." Her words struck him like a forceful blow, shattering the illusion of control he had so carefully nurtured. In that instant, Alexander recognized that the game was no longer a matter of mere competition or financial gain. It had become a profound struggle for identity and control, with Seraphina dismantling the very edifice of his self-assured dominance. As the days stretched into weeks, Alexander's attempts to subdue her only reinforced her inner strength, leaving him to confront an unsettling truth. He had underestimated the depth of her resolve. Desperation began to creep into his calculated world, driving him to adopt ever more invasive tactics. He isolated her from her acquaintances, systematically shutting down any avenues through which she might reclaim her autonomy. Yet with every blow he dealt, Seraphina emerged more unyielding, her spirit burning with an intensity that defied his every effort. Then, on a night thick with tension and unsaid challenges, Seraphina unveiled a revelation that sent ripples through the fragile balance of their relationship. "Alexander, you seem to believe that you hold all the power," she stated with deliberate calm, "but you remain ignorant of the fact that I have my own plan, a plan that will upend everything you think you control." Stunned into silence, Alexander realized that in his fervent bid for supremacy, he had overlooked the most crucial element of their contest, the human heart and its unyielding capacity for resistance. In the weeks that followed, the air between them grew charged with an almost palpable intensity, as each day seemed to add new layers to the complex interplay of defiance and reluctant admiration. Alexander's initial confidence, once unassailable, began to waver in the face of Seraphina's unrelenting spirit. The lavish world he so cherished, the glittering penthouse, the extravagant gifts, the relentless pursuit of dominance, gradually transformed into a battlefield where each move was met with an equal measure of resistance. And yet, within that struggle, Alexander found himself changing in ways he could neither predict nor fully understand. There was a growing, if unsettling, realization that perhaps his quest for control had concealed within it a profound fear of vulnerability, a fear that Seraphina's defiance had forcefully brought to light. As the designated 6 months passed slowly and painfully, every encounter, every conversation, and every challenge between them took on the weight of a high-stakes duel. For Alexander, who had once believed that his wealth and power were invincible shields, the experience of facing a woman who would not be tamed became both an affront and a lesson. In a climactic confrontation one fateful evening, the veneer of control finally shattered entirely. "You believe that your money can dictate every outcome," Seraphina declared, her voice resolute and unyielding. "But know this, respect, dignity, and self-worth are not commodities to be bartered." In that moment, Alexander found himself standing at a precipice. his heart conflicted between the urge to assert control and the dawning realization that genuine admiration for another's spirit might be far more powerful than any wager. By the time the 6-month term neared its conclusion, the relationship between Alexander and Seraphina had morphed into something neither had initially anticipated. No longer was it a mere transaction or a contest of wills. It had evolved into a complex tapestry of defiance, mutual recognition, and the painful process of self-reckoning. Alexander, who had embarked on this journey with the sole intent of winning a bet and proving his dominance, now faced the stark possibility that in trying to control Seraphina, he might ultimately lose control of himself. And in that uncertainty lay the true cost of the wager, a cost far greater than any monetary sum, one that threatened to expose the very vulnerabilities hidden beneath his once impregnable exterior. In the quiet aftermath of that life-altering revelation, Alexander Sterling, once the master of every encounter, found himself utterly unmoored in a sea of guilt and disquiet. The gilded penthouse in Londinium, which had for so long served as a monument to his unassailable power and wealth, now loomed around him like a cold and indifferent prison. Late one night, after a bitter exchange that left the air thick with unresolved tension, Alexander remained alone in the vast, sparsely furnished living room, his eyes fixed on the shimmering cityscape beyond the enormous glass windows. The glittering lights that once filled him with a fierce sense of dominance now only deepened the hollowness inside him. As he stood there, lost in the silence of his own thoughts, Alexander could not help but reflect on the transformation that had been gradually unfurling within him. The woman he had once regarded merely as a pawn in a high-stakes wager, a mere piece in a grand game of control, had, over the course of their tumultuous 6-month union, become something far more complex and disconcerting. Seraphina Blake, whose resolute spirit had challenged every facet of his meticulously guarded persona, now stirred in him emotions that were both alien and deeply unsettling. No longer did he see her solely as a rival or an obstacle to be conquered. Instead, an unbidden desire to truly understand her began to take root. It was on a night much like this, after an explosive argument that had left their shared space echoing with the remnants of harsh words and shattered illusions, that Alexander's mind wandered back to a memory of an earlier evening. He recalled how, following a heated confrontation in which his carefully constructed facade had crumbled just enough to reveal glimpses of vulnerability, he had returned home determined to regain control. The corridors of his penthouse, usually echoing with the assured steps of a man in command, now resonated with the heavy, uncertain tread of someone besieged by inner turmoil. Yet even as he attempted to remind himself that his marriage to Seraphina was nothing more than a temporary contract, a wager to be won, he could not dismiss the inexplicable pull that she exerted over him. Days had passed since that fateful confrontation, and the air between them had grown increasingly thick with an unspoken tension that neither could quite dispel. In one particularly poignant moment, during the long hours of a brooding evening, Alexander recalled the haunting words of his old friend Tristan Cole. At a casual dinner not long ago, Tristan had leaned in conspiratorially and remarked, "Alexander, you've always prided yourself on having everything firmly under control, but it appears that Seraphina is challenging you in ways no one else ever has." Those words had stung, not merely because they exposed a crack in his unyielding armor, but because they resonated with a truth that he could no longer ignore. Alexander's forced smile at the time masked a growing inner disquiet, a recognition that his world, once defined by unassailable power and calculated conquests, was now shifting into realms he had never imagined. One evening, driven by a desperate need to reclaim his sense of order, Alexander resolved to confront the situation head-on. With a determined heaviness in his heart, he strode into the penthouse, intent on breaking through the invisible barrier that had so slowly arisen between himself and Seraphina. As he entered the elegantly designed living area, he found her seated on a sumptuous couch, absorbed in the quiet ritual of reading. The soft lamplight played upon her features, casting gentle shadows that betrayed nothing of the inner fortitude that had become her hallmark. The sight of her, so serene, so implacably calm, compelled him to speak. "Can we talk?" he inquired, his voice betraying a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. Seraphina closed her book with deliberate calm, her eyes meeting his with a steady, almost hypnotic intensity. "Of course," she replied, her tone devoid of any pretense, as though she had been waiting for that very moment. Taking a seat directly opposite her, Alexander found himself grappling with a torrent of conflicted emotions. The atmosphere was charged, every silence laden with the weight of unspoken truths. Finally, with an honesty that surprised even him, he asked, "What are we doing here, Seraphina? What is the purpose of all this?" His question was not merely an inquiry about the mechanics of their arrangement, it was a plea for understanding, a desperate search for meaning beyond the shallow confines of a mere contract. For several long, measured seconds, Seraphina simply regarded him. Then, with a calmness that belied the depth of her inner conviction, she spoke. "I am not playing a game, Alexander. I never was. From the moment I agreed to this union, it was for reasons far greater than the mere exchange of money or the assertion of control." Her words, soft yet resolute, carried an undercurrent of pain and purpose. "I am here for something bigger, a truth that transcends any wager you might have ever conceived. If you have not yet realized this, perhaps it is time for you to open your eyes." In that moment, the fragile veneer of Alexander's dominance began to shatter, replaced by an awareness that his carefully curated world was unraveling. The revelation hit him with a force he had not anticipated. Frustration and despair mingled within him as he struggled to articulate the tumult that raged inside. "I know you harbor secrets, Seraphina," he admitted bitterly, his voice trembling with suppressed anger and vulnerability. "But what infuriates me is that the more I try to understand you, the more I realize that I am losing control, and that is something I cannot abide." His words echoed through the room, each syllable a testament to the internal battle he waged against the erosion of his power. Unable to remain still, Alexander abruptly rose from his seat, his body restless as though it sought to dispel the overwhelming weight of the truth he had just been forced to confront. Seraphina, ever composed, watched him intently before rising herself and stepping toward him, halting only a few inches away. In that charged moment, time seemed to slow, and the very air between them vibrated with unspoken emotion. "Alexander," she began, her voice soft and measured, "this is not about control." Her eyes, warm yet unyielding, sought his, as if trying to convey a message that transcended mere words. "You have spent your life striving to dominate every situation, every person you encounter. But with me, you must learn that control is not the answer to everything. Sometimes the beauty of life lies in accepting things as they are." Her words resonated within him, stirring something deep and unexpected. For the first time as he looked into her eyes, Alexander felt a connection, a fragile, tentative link that suggested he was beginning to see Seraphina not merely as an adversary in a wager, but as a person with her own intricate desires and hidden depths. In that moment, his voice softened to a near whisper as he asked, "So what is it that you truly want?" The question hung in the space between them, pregnant with uncertainty and longing. A mysterious smile played upon Seraphina's lips as she replied, "I want you to figure that out for yourself, Alexander." With those enigmatic words, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with a turbulent mix of emotions and a mind spinning with possibilities. In the days that followed, the distance between them appeared to widen, yet paradoxically, Alexander felt a growing closeness to her, a magnetic pull that defied the physical separation. His obsession with deciphering the enigma that was Seraphina began to consume him entirely, transforming his every waking moment into a quest for understanding. Even as the final days of their 6-month contract loomed ever closer, Alexander found himself sleepless and restless, tormented by the relentless need to unlock the secrets that lay hidden behind Seraphina's calm exterior. Every lead he pursued, every whispered clue gleaned from hired detectives and covert inquiries into her past, only led him deeper into a labyrinth of carefully orchestrated mysteries. It seemed as though Seraphina had anticipated his every move, always remaining one step ahead, orchestrating the dance of their intertwined fates with a precision that defied his own. One particular night, after a long and exhausting day of fruitless investigations, Alexander returned later than usual to his penthouse. The dim glow of the balcony lights beckoned him, and as he stepped outside, he found Seraphina seated there, like a solitary monarch, surveying her realm. The cool night air did little to quell the storm raging within him. Tonight, he felt, would be the night when all would be revealed. A moment of truth that would either shatter the fragile balance between them or force him to confront the depths of his own corruption. With hesitant steps, Alexander approached the balcony. The sound of his footsteps on the polished stone was the only accompaniment to the heavy silence that enveloped them. Seraphina did not immediately turn to face him. Instead, she continued gazing out over the sprawling city, her posture as serene and unyielding as ever. Finally, unable to contain the mounting pressure, Alexander's voice broke the silence. "I need answers, Seraphina," he said firmly, though his tone was laced with an unmistakable tremor of vulnerability. "I can't continue living in this web of half-truths and shadows. Please, tell me the truth." At his plea, Seraphina exhaled slowly and rose from her seat. She turned to face him, her eyes, typically cool and calculating, now glimmering with an emotion that was both fierce and deeply pained. With a bitter smile that hinted at long-held grievances, she crossed her arms and asked, "The truth, Alexander? Do you really wish to know it?" Though every fiber of his being braced for the impact of what was to come, the tension between them was palpable, each heartbeat a countdown to a revelation that would forever alter the course of their lives. Her voice, when it came, was imbued with an icy resolve. "You have no idea who I truly am," Seraphina began, her tone cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. "All your life, you have regarded people as mere pawns on your chessboard, moving them at your whim. But this time, Alexander, you were the pawn. I have been playing this game from the very beginning." A chill ran down Alexander's spine as her words settled over him like a shroud. The unyielding certainty he had once taken for granted, the belief that he always controlled every situation, began to crumble beneath the weight of her confession. "Do you remember the name Richmond?" she continued, her voice growing sharper with each word. "Of course you do not. Men like you never remember the faces of those you discard. My father, a modest man who owned a small company struggling to stay afloat, suffered because of your unrelenting ambition." Alexander's mind raced, trying desperately to reconcile the fragment of memory that now threatened to upend his carefully constructed narrative. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, confusion mingling with dawning horror. Taking a step closer, Seraphina's eyes burned with a mix of anger and sorrow. "My father, an honest man, who fought every day to support our family, was crushed under the weight of your empire building. You, Alexander, destroyed everything he had worked for. His company collapsed, and ultimately it led to his downfall. He lost everything, and in the wake of that devastation, he took his own life." For a long, agonizing moment, the words hung in the cold air, each syllable an indictment of a past Alexander had long since tried to forget. The impact of her revelation struck him like a physical blow. Memories of ruthless deals, of lives reduced to collateral in his quest for dominance, surged back with a force he could neither deny nor escape. "Seraphina," he began haltingly, the sound of his own voice trembling in disbelief, I had no idea." Yet even as he spoke, she raised her hand to silence him. "No," she cried, her voice rising with a raw, unbridled intensity. "You never cared enough to see. You destroyed lives without a second thought, lives that mattered to people who believed in something beyond your greed." Tears welled in her eyes as she continued, her tone shifting from anger to a sorrow that cut deeper than any accusation. "You took my father from me, the only person I ever truly loved, while you reveled in luxury and power. And in the aftermath, my mother and I were left to drown in debt and despair, struggling to survive while you continued your relentless ascent." Alexander stood frozen, the enormity of his past transgressions crashing over him in a torrent of regret and self-reproach. The weight of guilt pressed down upon him, crushing his very spirit as he realized that the cost of his ambition had been far steeper than he had ever imagined. Seraphina's voice softened slightly, though the bitterness remained unmistakable. "I orchestrated every step of this bet, every moment of our encounter, so that you might come face to face with the pain you inflicted on others. I accepted this marriage not for financial gain, but to force you to confront the consequences of your actions. I wanted you to feel even a fraction of the anguish that has haunted me since my father's death." Her words, laced with both fury and sorrow, reverberated in the silent room like a solemn dirge. In that moment, Alexander's carefully constructed world shattered completely. He realized that the wager, which had once seemed like a trivial game, was in fact a meticulously planned reckoning, a chance for Seraphina to exact a form of justice that he could neither escape nor deny. I never knew," he whispered, his voice barely audible as he struggled to process the magnitude of her confession. "I never understood the true cost of my actions." Seraphina stepped even closer, her gaze unwavering as she delivered her final, haunting words. "You may have built your empire on the broken dreams of others, Alexander, but now you must live with the knowledge that your success came at an incalculable price. I am here not to destroy you, but to ensure that you never forget what you have done. The pain you caused will haunt you every day of your life." With that, she turned away, leaving him to collapse onto the plush sofa, overcome by a wave of despair and remorse. In the days that followed, the luxurious penthouse, once a symbol of his unyielding power, became a mausoleum of memories, each corner echoing with the ghosts of his past transgressions. Alexander wandered through his vast, empty rooms, haunted by the relentless echoes of Seraphina's words. Every lavish artifact, every trinket of wealth, now served as a stark reminder of a legacy tainted by greed and cruelty. The man who had once thrived on the thrill of domination found himself increasingly isolated, his soul weighed down by an unbearable sense of loss. As the final days of their contrived union drew near, Alexander's nights were plagued by insomnia and tortured recollections. The revelation of his true cost had left him shattered, and in the long hours of darkness he found himself questioning every decision that had led him to this inevitable reckoning. He began to understand, with a painful clarity, that the life he had built was built on the ruins of broken lives, a truth that now refused to be ignored. In a final, desperate bid to salvage what remained of his dignity, Alexander resolved to seek redemption in whatever form it might take. He knew that he could never undo the past, yet the seed of remorse that had been planted in his heart could perhaps be nurtured into something resembling change. With trembling resolve, he began to dismantle the empire that had once defined him, reaching out to those he had wronged and attempting to make amends in even the smallest of ways. Yet, even as he embarked on this arduous journey toward atonement, a part of him remained tormented by the memory of Seraphina's piercing gaze, a reminder of the day when his illusions of control were irrevocably shattered. Every step forward was haunted by the echo of her words, a constant refrain that would never allow him to forget the lives he had ruined. In that painful awareness lay the true cost of his ambition, a burden that would forever alter the man he had once been. Thus, in the silent corridors of his once mighty sanctuary, Alexander Sterling was forced to confront not only the devastation he had wrought upon others, but also the deep, irreversible changes that had taken root within his own soul. The bet, the conquest, the endless pursuit of power, all had collapsed into a stark, unyielding reality. The price of his ambition was not measured in dollars or deals, but in the irreparable damage inflicted upon the hearts of those he had left in his wake. Every word that escaped Seraphina's lips shattered, piece by piece, the carefully constructed world that Alexander Sterling had so long taken for granted. In that moment, the woman he had once believed to be nothing more than an instrument in his grand game, a mere pawn to be manipulated in the pursuit of power and profit, had turned the entire board on its head. For the very first time, Alexander found himself utterly and completely out of his depth, his ingrained certainties crumbling as the harsh reality of his actions came crashing down around him. Standing alone in the cavernous expanse of his opulent penthouse, Alexander felt the weight of his unraveling empire pressing down on him. The luxurious interior, which had once resonated with the triumphant echoes of his victories, now seemed cold and oppressive. The sprawling living room, with its high ceilings and meticulously arranged furnishings, was rendered mute and lifeless by the silence that followed Seraphina's revelation. The grandeur of the space did nothing to ease the suffocating atmosphere. Rather, every gleaming surface and every carefully chosen decorative accent served as a stark reminder of the power and wealth he had amassed at such a terrible cost. In that fateful moment, after Seraphina, whose eyes had burned with a mix of sorrow and unyielding determination, had recounted the agonizing truth of her past, Alexander stood motionless. The words she had spoken, laden with raw, unfiltered pain, echoed relentlessly in his mind. They dismantled his self-assured image, piece by piece, until nothing remained of the invincible figure he had prided himself on being. He had always viewed relationships as transactions, opportunities to assert control and gain further advantage. Now, however, he was confronted with the stark reality that the very person he had dismissed as an expendable game piece was capable of igniting a transformation within him. A transformation that left him vulnerable, exposed, and terrified. Seraphina had not lingered to offer him the luxury of time or space to process the cataclysmic nature of her disclosure. No, with the finality of one who had delivered the most devastating of truths, she turned on her heel and left him alone in the oppressive silence of the room. Abandoned to his own swirling emotions, Alexander was left to grapple with the enormity of his guilt. The air in the penthouse felt heavy, as if the very walls were closing in on him, each second stretching into an eternity of remorse and self-reproach. In the immediate aftermath of that encounter, Alexander's initial impulse was to reach out, to speak, to beg for forgiveness, to attempt to articulate the inexpressible sorrow that now gripped him. Yet when he opened his mouth, no words came forth. The cruel, unyielding truth was that nothing he could say would ever justify the pain he had inflicted. The silence that followed was not empty. It was laden with the weight of his failures, each unspoken apology a dagger twisting in his heart. In the days that followed, as Seraphina withdrew further into herself, Alexander began to experience the agony of being utterly ignored. Each morning brought a new trial. At breakfast, he would sit at the head of the table, expecting to command the room as he always had, only to find that Seraphina's eyes remained cast downward, her gaze fixed on the untouched meal before her. When he attempted to break the oppressive quiet, his words dissipated into the heavy air, swallowed by the wall of indifference that she had so carefully constructed between them. It was as if, in her deliberate silence, she was making a powerful statement, that his presence, once so commanding, had become as insignificant as a shadow in a vast, indifferent landscape. One morning, driven by a desperate need to bridge the widening chasm between them, Alexander called out to her as she prepared to leave the room. "Seraphina, we need to talk," he pleaded, his voice trembling with a mixture of anxiety and regret. Yet, even as he uttered those words, she continued to turn away from him, methodically adjusting her tailored coat with a cold detachment that chilled him to the core. The silence that followed was deafening, a reminder that even the simplest of interactions had become a battleground on which his pride and self-worth were being mercilessly eroded. When Seraphina finally left, gently closing the door behind her with a soft, almost deliberate click, Alexander was left alone with nothing but the echo of that sound in his mind. It was a sound that reverberated through the corridors of his soul, a constant reminder that he was being punished, not through overt violence or dramatic gestures, but through the slow, excruciating torment of being rendered invisible. The woman he had once deemed an accessory to his success was now actively dismantling the very foundation of his identity, leaving him to question everything he had ever known about power, control, and self-worth. At work, the effects of Seraphina's silent retribution began to manifest in unexpected yet insidious ways. Important meetings which had once proceeded with the smooth efficiency of a well-oiled machine were abruptly rescheduled without explanation. Critical business decisions that Alexander had made with unyielding confidence were suddenly being scrutinized and questioned by those who once admired his decisive leadership. Projects that he had initiated, projects that he had poured his ambition and resources into, started to unravel with a mysterious inevitability. Deep in his heart, Alexander knew that these setbacks were not the result of mere coincidence or misfortune. They were the calculated handiwork of Seraphina, an invisible puppeteer pulling at the strings of his meticulously built empire. At home, the deterioration of their relationship was equally palpable. Seraphina maintained an unwavering stance of absolute disdain, purposefully distancing herself from every attempt Alexander made to mend their fractured bond. She no longer joined him for meals, and whenever he tried to engage her in conversation, she responded with nothing more than cold, dismissive looks. The vibrant presence that had once animated the elegant halls of his penthouse had been replaced by a pervasive emptiness, a void that seemed to expand with every passing day. One particularly heart-wrenching evening, after yet another fruitless attempt to reach out to her, Alexander found Seraphina sitting alone in the living room, absorbed in the quiet solace of a book. The room was bathed in the soft glow of ambient lighting, a deceptive picture of calm that masked the turbulent undercurrents of their shared existence. Driven by a desperate need to reconnect, Alexander took a hesitant step forward. "Seraphina," he began softly, his voice laden with both remorse and an earnest longing. "I know I have done unspeakable things. I realize now the depth of the pain I have caused you. Please, can we try to work this out? Can we at least talk?" His plea was raw and unguarded, a sincere cry for redemption in the face of overwhelming guilt. Seraphina slowly closed the book she had been reading, her face an impassive mask of sorrow and resolve. After a long, agonizing pause, she finally looked up at him, her eyes as cold and unyielding as ever. "Talk?" she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You believe there is something left to be salvaged through mere words? After all that you have done, words are nothing more than empty echoes." Her tone was icy, each syllable a deliberate reminder of the irreparable damage he had inflicted. Desperation surged through Alexander as he rose from the couch, his body trembling with the weight of his remorse. "I was wrong, Seraphina," he insisted, moving closer with a fervent determination. "I know now that I cannot simply undo the past with promises or apologies. I swear I will change. I will do anything to make amends, to prove that I can be more than the man who brought you such suffering." His voice, usually so commanding, was now reduced to a quavering whisper, a plea from a man who had finally come to recognize the hollowness of his former self. Seraphina's gaze pierced through him, challenging the sincerity of his words with a look so intense that it seemed to strip him bare. "Change?" she repeated slowly, her voice laced with incredulity and deep-seated pain. "Do you honestly think that changing now can erase the scars? That your transformation can somehow bring back what you have stolen from me? Can it restore my father to the life he once knew, or heal the wounds inflicted upon my family during years of despair? No, Alexander, your change will not mend the past, and it will never undo the misery that your ambition has wrought." As she stepped closer, the intensity of her stare grew ever more daunting, and Alexander felt himself sinking deeper into the abyss of his own guilt. "What you do now isn't for me," she continued with a quiet finality. "It is for you. You will bear this burden of guilt every day of your life." For the first time in his existence, Alexander was forced to confront the undeniable truth that redemption was not a matter of simple gestures or fleeting words. There would be no immediate absolution, no swift restoration of the man he once believed himself to be. Instead, he would have to endure the relentless punishment of his actions. Each day a slow, agonizing retribution that would etch the memory of his transgressions indelibly into his soul. In the days that followed, Seraphina's methods of retribution grew increasingly insidious. Her cold disregard was not limited to their private life. It seeped into every facet of Alexander's existence. At work, his every decision was undermined by subtle yet deliberate disruptions. Meetings were rescheduled without warning, and long-anticipated projects began to falter in inexplicable ways. It was as if Seraphina were orchestrating a silent coup, pulling the invisible strings that bound his empire, ensuring that every victory he once celebrated was now tainted with the bitterness of failure. At home, the atmosphere grew even more oppressive. Seraphina deliberately avoided any attempt at reconciliation. She no longer shared meals with him, nor did she engage in even the most superficial conversation. Whenever Alexander tried to approach her, she would cast him aside with a look of cold indifference, as though his very presence were an inconvenience. One evening, after a disastrous day at work where a critical project had been sabotaged, Alexander returned to the penthouse to find Seraphina on the phone, her laughter echoing in a manner that was as cruel as it was calculated. He overheard snippets of her conversation, realizing with a heavy heart that she was discussing his professional decisions with a detached, almost clinical precision. It was a revelation that confirmed his worst fears. Seraphina was dismantling everything he had built, piece by piece, leaving him to suffer in silence. Unable to contain the torrent of emotions that surged within him, Alexander confronted her in the living room. "You're tearing everything apart," he said, his voice low and heavy with repressed anger and sorrow. "At work, at home, everywhere. You're destroying my life piece by piece." Seraphina regarded him coolly, her arms folded as she met his gaze with an expression that conveyed nothing but absolute resolve. "Destroying your life?" she retorted with a measured calm. "I'm merely returning to you the devastation you have wrought. I'm not here to ruin you financially. That would be too simple. I want you to live with the pain, to feel every small loss as it comes, to watch everything you built crumble, and to know without a doubt that it is your own doing." Those words struck Alexander with the force of a tidal wave. The magnitude of his mistakes, the cost of every ruthless decision, every heartless transaction came crashing down upon him. In that moment, he realized that he was now the victim of his own relentless ambition. The man who had once reveled in his power and control was now reduced to a shell, wandering aimlessly in a labyrinth of guilt and despair, haunted by the unyielding echoes of Seraphina's retribution. Weeks passed in a torturous blur as Seraphina continued to enforce her silent, calculated punishment. Alexander, once so confident and commanding, found himself diminished to a mere shadow of his former self. Every attempt to speak to her was met with cold stares and curt dismissals. Her indifference, like a corrosive acid, ate away at the remnants of his pride, leaving him sleepless and haunted by the memory of what he had done. Realizing that words alone held no power to mend the irreparable, Alexander gradually came to understand that only tangible actions could possibly convey his commitment to change. One morning, with a newfound determination burning within him, he resolved to give Seraphina the space she so desperately needed, while simultaneously demonstrating his sincere intent to transform. He began by quietly observing her daily routines. The subtle details that had once escaped his notice now became his guide. He learned that she cherished the delicate aroma of freshly brewed coffee, that she savored its bitter richness without a hint of sweetness, and that she held a quiet fondness for peonies, their lush petals symbolizing a fragile hope amidst despair. Determined to show that he was capable of change, Alexander ventured out to procure a bouquet of peonies from one of the most renowned florists in the city, a place that bore little resemblance to the cold, impersonal towers of his corporate domain. Instead of presenting the flowers directly to her, he left them gently arranged on the kitchen table, unaccompanied by any note or grand gesture. It was a simple act, a silent offering that spoke volumes of his desire to reconnect, to rebuild what had been shattered. That same afternoon, as Seraphina returned from one of her solitary walks, she discovered the bouquet. Though her expression remained unchanged, Alexander's observant eyes caught the brief moment when she paused before the flowers, inhaling their delicate fragrance as if drawing strength from their subtle beauty. It was a small sign, an indication that perhaps, just perhaps, the wall of indifference was not impenetrable after all. In the ensuing days, Alexander persisted with these quiet gestures. He meticulously arranged the breakfast table each morning, ensuring that her coffee was prepared exactly as she liked it, and then left without imposing his presence. He began to leave little tokens of care in places where she would find them: a favorite book on a side table, a softly playing tune in the background that resonated with memories of better times. Each small act was a deliberate effort to demonstrate his commitment to change, to show Seraphina that he was no longer the callous man who had once wielded his power without remorse. Yet, despite these humble attempts at reconciliation, Seraphina maintained the steadfast barrier between them. She continued to keep her distance, a silent testament to the wounds that could not be easily healed. Alexander understood that breaking through this barrier would require not only time and patience, but a profound transformation that went far beyond surface-level apologies. And so, even as he felt the heavy burden of his past pressing down on him, he resolved to persist, each small gesture a step, however tentative, toward a future where he might one day atone for his transgressions. Thus, in the midst of the oppressive silence and the relentless punishment, Alexander Sterling found himself at a crossroads, a moment of reckoning, where the man he once was and the man he needed to become stood in stark contrast. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, and there were no guarantees of forgiveness or redemption. But as he continued to leave peonies on the table, prepare her coffee with care, and honor the small details that defined Seraphina's world, he clung to a fragile hope, a hope that someday, in the quiet spaces between the echoes of guilt and the heavy silence of their shared existence, he might find a path to atonement. In that fragile hour, when the last vestiges of a broken trust clung to the chill of the evening, Alexander Sterling found himself compelled to prove that change was not an illusion, but a hard-won reality. Determined to show Seraphina Blake that he could be different, that he could win her back on her own terms, and with due respect for the space she so desperately needed, he embraced a quiet, measured approach. It was on a particularly cold night, when the wind whispered through the towering windows of his renovated penthouse in the vibrant metropolis of New Elysium, that the first hints of transformation began to surface. Wrapped in a soft, woolen blanket on the balcony, Seraphina sat silently, her eyes fixed on the shimmering tapestry of city lights below. The urban glow, usually a symbol of ceaseless ambition, now evoked memories of loss and the deep scars of the past. After a long moment of introspection, Alexander stepped forward with a cautious resolve. Clutching a cup of hot tea, knowing well that the warmth of such a drink had always soothed her on bitter nights, he approached her quietly. "I thought you might appreciate something warm tonight," he said in a hushed tone that carried neither insistence nor intrusion. Seraphina, her gaze still lost in the horizon, accepted the cup with a measured stillness. For several moments, the only sound was the rhythmic tapping of the wind against the glass panes. Alexander stood beside her in the subdued light, his presence a silent testament to his desire to simply be near her without overwhelming her with words. In that delicate silence, there was an unspoken acknowledgement that perhaps change was beginning to permeate the space between them, even if only imperceptibly. After what felt like an eternity, Seraphina finally broke the silence. "Why are you doing this, Alexander?" Her voice was soft yet carried an undeniable firmness, as though it were born out of both longing and a need for accountability. Recognizing the gravity of her inquiry, Alexander drew a deep breath and allowed the truth of his remorse and determination to spill forth. "Because I've come to realize that words alone are empty. Apologies, as sincere as they may be, cannot mend the past. I am trying to show you through my actions that I have changed, that I want to be a better man. Not just for you, but because I have discovered I need to change for myself." As he spoke, the bitter wind swirled around them, as if nature itself bore witness to the fragile promise of transformation. Seraphina remained silent for several long seconds, her eyes shifting momentarily from the bustling cityscape to the earnest face of the man beside her. "You cannot change the past, Alexander," she finally murmured, her tone softening as she acknowledged the veracity of his words. "I know that, but perhaps you can alter the future." Her words, though measured, carried a glimmer of hope, a fragile ember amid the cold shadows of regret. That evening marked a turning point. Over the next several days, Alexander's subtle gestures grew more frequent and imbued with genuine intent. No longer did he force his presence into every moment. Instead, he found solace in the quiet acts of kindness that had once been foreign to him. He left fresh bouquets of peonies, her favorite, as he had learned from observing her small routines, on the dining table without any fanfare or accompanying note. In the soft mornings, he prepared her coffee exactly as she liked it, strong, unsweetened, the aroma filling the silent kitchen with a tender reminder of a simpler time. Slowly, the harsh barriers that had once separated them began to wane, replaced by a cautious reawakening of connection. One day, as Alexander was preparing for a crucial business engagement, an unexpected interruption altered the course of his meticulously planned schedule. Dressed in a sharp suit and ready to confront another day in the corporate arena, he was taken aback when Seraphina entered the room with an unreadable expression, a look that pierced through the armor of his habitual self-assurance. "Can you cancel your meeting?" she asked suddenly, her tone carrying a weight that left no room for negotiation. The request, so out of character from the detached Seraphina of the past weeks, startled him into action. With barely a pause, Alexander reached for his phone and canceled the appointment. It was a small concession, yet it signified the first time in what felt like an eternity that she had chosen to reclaim a piece of their shared time. They then sat together on the couch, the silence between them now imbued with a tentative comfort, a silent affirmation that something was slowly changing. As the days unfolded, the new pattern of their interactions deepened the complexity of their relationship. Seraphina, though still guarded, began to offer Alexander fleeting moments of conversation during breakfast, a casual exchange here, a brief smile there. The once impenetrable wall of indifference that she had erected around her heart was now dotted with fragile openings. One evening, as the city outside pulsed with life and the penthouse resonated with the subdued hum of distant traffic, Seraphina spoke softly. "I'm not ready to fully forgive you, Alexander, but you're showing me that you are trying, and maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something new." Her admission, tentative yet sincere, sent a ripple of hope through Alexander's soul. He felt his heart race with the realization that the arduous journey toward redemption might finally be taking its first measurable steps. In that same quiet evening, as they sat side by side discussing trivial matters that nevertheless bridged the gap between past bitterness and a potential future, Alexander recognized that the road ahead would still be long and fraught with obstacles. Yet, for the first time, the sting of her disdain was tempered by a faint undercurrent of possibility. The ease of their conversation, however superficial, stood as a testament to his commitment to change. Even as the specter of their turbulent history loomed overhead, Alexander remained steadfast, vowing silently that he would do everything in his power to earn not just her tentative forgiveness, but eventually, her trust, and perhaps even her love. Still, beneath this emerging hope lay a shadow of uncertainty. Alexander was painfully aware that Seraphina harbored secrets, proportions of her truth that she had not yet revealed. There were moments when her eyes, usually so inscrutable, flickered with hidden sorrow, hinting at a story too heavy to share in its entirety. One rainy night, when the penthouse was bathed in the soft, melancholy glow of streetlights and the rhythmic patter of rain against the windows, Alexander sensed a change in her demeanor. Seraphina appeared more withdrawn than usual, her introspection deepened by the somber weather. Unable to contain the rising tide of his concern, he approached her gently. "Seraphina," he began, his voice low and laden with a mix of trepidation and earnest inquiry, "I feel that there's something you're not telling me, something important. Please, if you're willing, share it with me." For a long, agonizing moment, silence reigned between them, a silence so heavy that it seemed to suspend time itself. Then, with a trembling exhale, Seraphina set aside the remnants of her solitude and looked up at him with eyes that bore the weight of years of suppressed pain. "You're right, Alexander," she said softly, her voice a delicate blend of sorrow and resolve. "I've been holding something back, a truth that I did not believe I could share until I was sure you were ready to face it." Her confession sent a shiver through him as he leaned in, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. Taking a deep breath, Seraphina continued, "Do you remember the company that you so ruthlessly dismantled? The one my father managed with all his heart?" Her tone was steady, yet imbued with a profound grief that made every word resonate with finality. "I told you once that your ambition had destroyed our family. But there is more. I was pregnant at the time, when everything was falling apart, when the pressure and despair overwhelmed us. And I lost the baby." The words fell like a sledgehammer upon Alexander's soul. For a moment he could only stare, his mind reeling from the shock. I was not aware," he stammered, his voice barely audible, choked by the enormity of her revelation. Seraphina's eyes, now shimmering with tears that betrayed a deep and abiding sorrow, lowered as she recounted the relentless cascade of loss. "The devastation you wrought did not end with the collapse of a business or a family's ruin," she whispered. "It ended a life that could have been, extinguishing a hope that was as delicate as it was precious." The weight of her words pressed down on Alexander, leaving him breathless and shattered by the realization that his insatiable hunger for power had cost far more than he could ever have imagined. In that moment, the cumulative burden of his past transgressions, each ruthless decision, each life reduced to collateral damage, came crashing down upon him, mingling with the guilt that had long festered beneath his exterior. He tried desperately to find words that might bridge the vast chasm of pain between them. "Seraphina, I never knew," he managed, his voice thick with regret and disbelief. "I cannot begin to fathom the extent of what I have done, or the depth of your suffering." His plea, however, seemed to only intensify her sorrow. With a pained yet unwavering gaze, Seraphina replied, "You destroyed lives, Alexander. You never took the time to see the human cost of your ambitions. I lost my baby, and you continued on as if nothing mattered." Her voice, both accusatory and mournful, cut him to the core. Every syllable was a stark reminder that his relentless pursuit of success had left behind a trail of irreversible destruction. For a long time, silence reigned once more, a silence so profound that it seemed to absorb every hope Alexander had harbored for redemption. Finally, with the quiet resignation of a man who understood that no apology could undo the past, he whispered, "I know my actions are unforgivable. I am ready to bear the burden of my mistakes, to live with this guilt for the rest of my life if it means I can somehow make amends." His voice trembled with the raw honesty of a man stripped bare by his own remorse. Seraphina regarded him for a long, heavy moment, her expression a blend of sorrow and reluctant acceptance. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you completely," she said, her tone softening just enough to hint at a fragile possibility. "But I see that you are trying. I see that you are willing to do whatever it takes to change. Perhaps one day you might find a way to at least move forward." Though her words did not erase the deep wounds of the past, they offered a glimmer of hope, a tentative, uncertain promise that redemption might be possible, however distant. In the weeks that followed that stormy night, the dynamics of their fractured relationship began to evolve once more. Alexander, now fully committed to proving that he was a changed man, dedicated himself entirely to small, consistent acts of kindness that spoke louder than any apology ever could. He canceled work commitments to be present at home, ensuring that every gesture, from preparing breakfast exactly as Seraphina liked it to leaving thoughtful tokens of affection, was imbued with the sincerity of his transformation. Each day, the quiet, measured interactions between them slowly began to build a new foundation. Though Seraphina remained cautious and her guard was still firmly in place, the ice that had once rendered her completely aloof was now showing signs of melting, even if only slightly. One evening, as the rain continued its soft, relentless patter against the expansive windows of their home, Alexander observed a subtle yet profound shift in Seraphina's demeanor. She had been spending more time in quiet reflection, her eyes occasionally glancing in his direction with a mixture of guarded hope and lingering pain. Mustering his courage, he broke the stillness. "Seraphina," he began gently, "I feel that there is still something left unsaid between us. Please, if you're willing, share with me what you have been holding back. I want to understand fully, no matter how painful it may be." For a long, suspended moment, the room was filled with the quiet hum of the rain and the slow beat of two hearts uncertain of what the future might hold. Then, with trembling resolve, Seraphina finally spoke. "I have been holding back, not out of malice, but because I feared that revealing my deepest pain might shatter what little hope we have of rebuilding something real." Her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, met his, and in that gaze, Alexander saw the full measure of her vulnerability. "You once demolished a company, my father's company, the one that was our lifeline. And in doing so, you not only ruined him, but also ripped away a part of me. I was pregnant at the time, and I lost the baby amidst the chaos and despair that followed. That loss has haunted me ever since." The impact of her confession was almost too much to bear. Alexander's heart sank as he absorbed the gravity of what she had shared, a revelation that compounded his guilt with a fresh, piercing pain. I never knew," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I cannot imagine the depth of your suffering." His words, laced with anguish and remorse, seemed to hang in the air, as Seraphina wiped away a solitary tear. "You destroyed not just a company but a future that could have been so full of promise," she said quietly. "I lost my baby, and along with that, a part of my hope." Overwhelmed by the magnitude of his mistakes, Alexander's entire being trembled with the realization that his insatiable ambition had exacted a price far beyond what he had ever anticipated. "I am so sorry, Seraphina," he pleaded, his eyes pleading for some form of absolution. "I would do anything to undo the damage I've caused. I will carry this burden for the rest of my life if it means I can begin to make things right." His voice, though desperate, was filled with a quiet determination, a promise that he would relentlessly work to atone for his sins. Seraphina, with a measured breath and a gaze that held both lingering pain and a hint of possibility, responded, "I do not know if I can ever forgive you completely. What you did has left scars that may never heal fully, but I can see that you are trying. I see that you want to change, and maybe, just maybe, one day I might find it in my heart to let go of some of this pain." Her words, though they did not offer immediate absolution, carried the promise of a slow, uncertain healing process. In that moment, as the rain subsided and the first soft glimmers of dawn began to creep over the horizon of New Elysium, Alexander knew that the path ahead would be arduous and long. Yet he also knew that every small gesture, every act of genuine care, was a step toward redeeming the person he had once been. The road to forgiveness would be paved with patience, humility, and the relentless pursuit of change, qualities he now embraced with every fiber of his being. For Alexander Sterling, the journey toward redemption was no longer a choice but an imperative. He vowed to honor the memory of what had been lost by transforming his life, not for the sake of reclaiming what was once his, but for the sake of building something that might one day, even if only in a small measure, be worthy of forgiveness. And as the new day dawned over New Elysium, a fragile hope began to emerge. A hope that maybe, just maybe, even the deepest wounds might one day start to heal. In the quiet aftermath of that fateful confrontation, as the night deepened over New Elysium, Seraphina Blake's parting words resonated in Alexander Sterling's soul like the final notes of a melancholic symphony. "We'll see if you can," she had said, her tone both resolute and laden with challenge. The silence that followed was dense with unspoken promises and possibilities, a silence that, despite its weight, carried the faint glimmer of a new beginning. As Seraphina rose and walked toward the door, leaving Alexander alone on the plush sofa of his penthouse, a strange calm descended upon him. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he did not succumb to despair. Instead, he sensed that the arduous journey ahead might finally be illuminated by hope. The days that followed, Seraphina's heart-wrenching revelation transformed Alexander in ways he had never anticipated. Every word she had spoken, every accusation and every tear shed, echoed relentlessly in his mind, searing into his conscience the undeniable truth of the havoc his ambition had wrought. The heavy burden of guilt, which once threatened to immobilize him, instead ignited a fierce determination. He resolved that the pain he now bore would fuel his transformation. He would not merely strive to win Seraphina's love back as a prize from a cruel bet, but would embark on a quest to become a man worthy of respect, not only from her, but also from the many lives he had shattered through his ruthless business practices. That very morning, as the pale light of dawn crept through the high windows of his penthouse, Alexander made a solemn decision. He would not allow his past transgressions to condemn him forever. The first step on his path to redemption was to repair the damage he had inflicted upon others. With resolute determination, he began reaching out to the families whose lives had been derailed by his insatiable pursuit of wealth and power. His first visit took him to a modest neighborhood far removed from the glittering opulence of New Elysium, a place where the scars of corporate devastation were still raw and painful. Unannounced, Alexander found himself standing at the door of a humble home. When the door swung open, a man with eyes that mirrored the deep sorrow of lost dreams and shattered aspirations regarded him with a mixture of disbelief and guarded suspicion.
"I'm Alexander Sterling,"
he began, his voice trembling with a sincerity that was new to him. "I'm here to apologize." The man's bitter laugh was a harsh reply to his earnest words. "Apologize? And what will that change now?" he asked, his voice echoing with years of accumulated grief. "I cannot change the past." But Alexander's reply was firm and resolute. "No, I cannot change what has been done, but I can help rebuild the future." And so began a long and arduous journey, a pilgrimage of restitution and heartfelt contrition. Over the following weeks, Alexander tirelessly knocked on doors, meeting with families who had suffered under the weight of his corporate conquests. He offered not only monetary compensation, but more importantly his time and his commitment to understanding the full extent of his actions. He donated generous sums to struggling small businesses that had once been vibrant centers of community life, and he set up recovery programs to help displaced entrepreneurs rebuild their shattered dreams. In every gesture and every humble word, Alexander sought to demonstrate that his transformation was real, that he was striving with every ounce of his being to become a better man. Throughout this process, Seraphina observed from a respectful distance. At first, she maintained her guarded stance, watching Alexander's actions with a mixture of skepticism and hope. She knew that true forgiveness would not come easily, for the wounds of the past were deep and painful. Yet as the days turned into weeks and Alexander's commitment to change became undeniable, she began to feel a stirring of something new, a cautious respect, perhaps even admiration, for the man who was slowly shedding the arrogance and cruelty of his former self. One crisp evening, as Seraphina stood on the balcony wrapped in a soft knitted shawl, gazing out over the glittering expanse of New Elysium, Alexander quietly approached her once again. He carried a small cup of hot tea, the very beverage she so cherished on cold nights. "I thought you might like something warm," he said gently, his voice carrying neither insistence nor the remnants of his former dominance. For a long while, Seraphina said nothing, her eyes fixed on the luminous horizon beyond, absorbing the quiet gesture. Then, in a voice that was soft but steady, she asked, "How are things today, Alexander?" He sighed deeply, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of countless apologies and hard-won lessons. "Tough," he admitted, his tone laden with both regret and resolve. "Every conversation, every apology feels like a small step toward becoming a better person. Not just for you, Seraphina, but for myself too." His words hung in the cool air, mingling with the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the sleeping city. For the first time that evening, Seraphina turned to meet his gaze. In her eyes, Alexander saw a softness that had long been hidden behind walls of pain and anger, a hint of vulnerability that he had never witnessed before. "I know you can't change the past," she said slowly, "but maybe you can change the future." That simple affirmation, filled with both caution and hope, lit a spark within him. In the days that followed, their interactions grew incrementally warmer. Seraphina began to accept his thoughtful gestures, a bouquet of fresh peonies left quietly on the kitchen table, the perfectly brewed cup of black coffee he prepared just the way she liked it, a gently composed note tucked away in a book she once cherished. Each small act was a silent testament to his dedication, a plea for redemption that resonated far more powerfully than any grand, hollow promise could ever do. One day, as Alexander was preparing for a crucial business meeting, Seraphina surprised him by appearing in his study with a look that was both unexpected and deeply significant. "Can you cancel your meeting?" she asked suddenly, her tone leaving no room for argument. Taken aback by her concern over his affairs, a stark departure from her previous indifference, Alexander hesitated only a moment before canceling the meeting. That simple act of reprioritization spoke volumes. It was the first time in weeks that Seraphina had chosen to invest her time in him. They spent the subsequent hours together on the living room couch, where the silence between them had shifted from one of oppressive distance to a tentative, unforced comfort. As their relationship slowly began to mend, Alexander could sense that there were still parts of Seraphina's heart that remained locked away. Fragments of a painful past she had not yet been ready to share. One quiet night, when the gentle rhythm of rain pattered against the windows, and the world outside seemed to dissolve into a soft blur of shadows and light, Alexander's curiosity overcame his respect for her silence. "Seraphina," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I feel there's something you haven't told me. Something that still weighs on you. Please, if you're willing, share it with me. I want to understand everything." For a long moment, the only sound was the soft tapping of raindrops. Then, with a hesitant sigh, Seraphina's eyes met his, filled with a mix of pain and resolve. "You're right, Alexander," she whispered. "I have been holding something back. I've carried a secret that I feared would shatter what little hope we have of rebuilding our lives together." Her voice faltered for a moment as she gathered her thoughts, and then she continued, "Do you remember the company that your relentless ambition dismantled? The one that my father managed with so much love and dedication?" Her tone was measured but pained. "I told you before that your actions destroyed not only his business, but our family's livelihood. But there is more. I was pregnant at that time, a future, a promise that was lost amidst the chaos and despair that followed. I lost the baby, and with it, a part of my very hope." The revelation struck Alexander like a thunderclap. For a moment he was utterly silent, overwhelmed by the realization that his insatiable drive had cost not just financial ruin, but the loss of a life that could have been, a life that had never had a chance to blossom. I never knew, he managed, his voice barely a whisper, choked by the weight of his remorse. I cannot fathom the depth of your suffering. Seraphina's eyes glistened with tears as she continued. You destroyed lives, Alexander. You never cared to see the human cost of your pursuits. I lost my baby, and you moved on as if the devastation meant nothing. Her words, though delivered with a tremor of sorrow, cut through him with devastating clarity. The immense guilt that had plagued him for weeks now surged with a renewed intensity. I am so sorry, Seraphina, he pleaded, his voice thick with anguish. I would carry this burden for the rest of my life if it meant I could begin to make amends. In the silence that followed, the air between them became charged with a fragile possibility. Slowly, Seraphina's expression softened. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, she said quietly, but I can see that you are truly trying to change. Perhaps one day I might find a way to let go of some of this pain. Her words did not erase the scars of the past, but they offered a tentative promise of healing, a promise that redemption, however distant, was not entirely out of reach. That morning, as the first golden rays of sunlight spilled into the city of New Elysium, Alexander felt a renewed determination stirring within him. He resolved that the path to atonement would not be walked in isolation. In a series of bold, heartfelt actions, his visits were unannounced and filled with an earnest humility that took him far from the plush corridors of power into the everyday neighborhoods where broken dreams still lingered. In one poignant encounter, he stood before the modest home of a former rival, a man whose business and family had been shattered by Alexander's ambition. I'm Alexander Sterling, he said softly, his voice heavy with contrition, and I'm here to apologize. Though the man's bitter laughter and piercing gaze spoke of a pain that could never be undone, Alexander persisted, offering not only compensation, but a genuine promise to help rebuild what he had destroyed. Over the next several weeks, he donated generously to local businesses, set up recovery initiatives, and spent long hours listening to the stories of those he had once overlooked. Through these actions, Alexander began to reconstruct not only the shattered lives of others, but also the fragments of his own broken soul. Throughout his journey, Seraphina observed from afar, her cautious heart slowly warming to the possibility that the man before her was no longer the callous executive of his past. With each act of restitution, with each humble gesture of care, the walls between them crumbled further. One evening, as the gentle hum of the city merged with the soft murmur of reconciliatory conversations, Alexander found himself once again on the balcony with Seraphina. The city lights sparkled in the cool night air, and for a moment, the weight of the past seemed to lift just enough to let hope shine through. How are you feeling today? Seraphina asked quietly, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. Alexander exhaled deeply. Today was difficult, he admitted, but necessary. Every conversation, every apology, it's a step toward becoming someone worthy of your trust and of the people I hurt. His words carried a raw sincerity that resonated in the space between them. Seraphina turned to him, her gaze softening as if seeing the changed man before her for the first time. I see that you are trying, Alexander, she said gently. Perhaps it is time for us to leave the past behind and build something new together. In that moment, a fragile bridge of forgiveness began to span the chasm that had once seemed insurmountable. The turning point came as their 6-month arranged union reached its end. Yet, rather than marking a final farewell, it became the foundation of a genuine, heartfelt partnership. Over time, the distance between Alexander and Seraphina melted away. Their conversations grew warm and unforced, filled with shared laughter and mutual understanding. No longer were they bound by the cold terms of a bet. They had become two souls rediscovering each other amid the wreckage of a painful past. One evening, as the 6-month period drew to a close, Alexander prepared a special dinner, a quiet, intimate gathering that celebrated their arduous journey rather than the superficial glamour of a corporate affair. With a nervous yet hopeful heart, he confessed during the meal, I know our agreement is nearly over, but I don't want this to end. His voice wavered as he continued. I've fallen in love with you, Seraphina, truly. I want us to continue our life together not as the result of a bet, but as a real couple, built on trust, respect, and love." Seraphina's eyes widened in surprise and softened with emotion as she listened. "I love you too, Alexander," she replied, her voice gentle yet resolute. "I want to build something with you, a future where we both leave the past behind and embrace what lies ahead." In that instant, the weight of their shared hardships lifted, replaced by the promise of a new beginning. Months later, Seraphina noticed subtle changes in her body, an unexpected warmth in the mornings and a persistent feeling of nausea that she could no longer ignore. A subsequent checkup confirmed what neither of them had dared hope: she was pregnant. When Seraphina shared the news with Alexander, his reaction was one of pure, unadulterated joy. Amid laughter and tears, he embraced her tightly, both of them marveling at the miraculous chance to start anew. "Everything we've been through," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion, "all the pain and heartache, it has led us to this moment. I want to do this right, Seraphina. I want to marry you again, this time for real, out of love and a commitment to building our future together." Seraphina's eyes shimmered with tears of happiness as she whispered, "I want that too, Alexander. A fresh start with no more bets, no more games, just us." Their second wedding was an intimate celebration, unburdened by the pomp and circumstance of their previous life. Close friends and family gathered in a modest setting, where every smile and every tear bore witness to the resilience of two souls who had overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. As they danced slowly under the soft glow of lanterns, Seraphina rested her head on Alexander's chest and murmured, "Who would have thought it all started with a bet?" Alexander smiled, holding her close, and replied, "Who would have thought it would be the best bet I ever made?" In that tender moment, with a future brimming with love, redemption, and hope stretching before them, Alexander and Seraphina embraced the promise of a new beginning. Alexander knew that his journey toward true change was far from over, that he still had much to prove to Seraphina, to himself, and to the families he had once wronged. But now he had something worth fighting for. A chance to be the man Seraphina deserved and the father their child would need. With every step they took together, they were building a life founded on genuine affection and the hard-won lessons of the past. As the final chords of their wedding celebration faded into the night, and the soft murmur of whispered dreams filled the air, their hearts beat in unison. Two souls, once defined by rivalry and regret, now united by the profound, transformative power of forgiveness and love. Sometimes, the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. What started as a bet turned into a powerful journey of redemption, forgiveness, and real love. This story reminds us that people can change if they have the courage to face their past, take responsibility, and truly fight for those they love. But what about you? Do you believe in second chances? Would you be able to forgive someone like Alexander? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on love, forgiveness, and what it really means to change. And if this story moved you in any way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul.